The surgical lamp blazed white-hot above Margaret Sullivan's face. As such, she lay motionless on the table, local anesthetic numbing her scalp, but leaving her mind viciously alert. Through the angled mirror, she watched Patricia Wilson's gloved fingers tremble. The forceps emerged slowly from behind Maggie's right ear, gripping something that caught the light metallic. Deliberate, wrong. Nurse Sarah Thompson's face went chalk white. She stumbled backward, hand pressed against her mouth, then fled the room. The door slammed. Dr. Wilson placed the object into the sterile tray with a sound like a whispered accusation. Under magnification, Maggie could see it clearly now, a microchip no larger than a grain of rice, etched with Cyrillic lettering she couldn't read but understood completely. "What is that?" Maggie's voice cracked. "What was inside me?" Nobody answered. The heart monitor screamed faster. Leave a like and share your thoughts in the comments along with the city you're watching from now. Let's continue with the story. 18 months earlier, Margaret Sullivan's life had been unremarkably ordinary. She woke each morning at 6:30 in her modest two-bedroom apartment in Reston, Virginia, made coffee in the same chipped mug she'd owned for a decade, and drove 40 minutes to Blackstone Defense Solutions, where she'd worked as a data analyst for 15 years. The divorce from Thomas had been finalized 2 years prior. They'd separated quietly, without drama or shouting matches. Just a slow erosion of something that had once felt solid. When people asked why, Maggie offered the same rehearsed line, "We grew apart." It was easier than admitting she didn't fully understand it herself. Thomas had simply withdrawn, spending longer hours at his office, becoming a stranger who shared her address. Now he lived in a spacious house in McLean with his new wife, Brittany, a woman 15 years younger with perfect teeth and a wardrobe Maggie couldn't afford on her best day. The contrast stung, though she'd never admitted aloud. Their daughter, Emily, 16, had chosen to live primarily with her father. The custody agreement said 50-50, but Emily's actual presence in Maggie's apartment had dwindled to occasional weekends and obligatory holiday dinners. The girl blamed her mother for the divorce, though she'd never said so directly. It was there in the clipped phone calls, the one-word text responses, the way Emily's eyes slid past Maggie's face during their forced conversations. Emily was brilliant, genuinely, frighteningly brilliant. She'd been accepted into advanced mathematics programs, spent her free time solving cryptography puzzles that made Maggie's head swim. Teachers called her gifted. Thomas called her their greatest achievement. Maggie just called her over and over, hoping someday Emily would answer with something more than cold politeness. An hour and a half west, Maggie's mother, Eleanor, lived alone in Winchester at 82. She was beginning to forget things where she'd placed her glasses, what day it was, sometimes even Maggie's name. The doctors called it early-stage Alzheimer's. Maggie called it terrifying. She drove out every Sunday, brought groceries, paid bills, and pretended not to notice when her mother asked the same question 3 times in an hour. The money was always tight. Assisted living facilities cost more than Maggie earned in a year. She'd looked into it once, seen the numbers, and closed the brochure, feeling sick. One morning that January, while pulling her hair into a ponytail, Maggie's fingers brushed against a small bump behind her right ear. It was firm, about the size of a pea, and didn't hurt when she pressed it. She frowned at her reflection, trying to remember 7 years ago, the business trip to Romania, the car accident on that rain-slicked road outside Bucharest, 2 days in a local hospital, unconscious. When she'd woken, there'd been a neat row of stitches behind her ear where she'd struck the window. The doctor said it was nothing, just a minor wound. It had healed. Maggie dropped her hand and finished getting ready for work. It was probably nothing. 6 months passed before Maggie admitted something was wrong. The small bump behind her ear had grown from the size of a pea to something closer to a walnut. What had been easy to ignore now pressed against her skull with a dull, persistent ache that sharpened whenever she turned her head too quickly. She told herself she was too busy. There was a massive project at work analyzing defense system vulnerabilities for a government contract, and her team was drowning in deadlines. She stayed late most nights, surviving on vending machine coffee in the desperate hope that if she proved herself indispensable, they'd finally promote her to senior analyst. But the real reason she avoided the doctor had nothing to do with work. Her mother had died of cancer. Maggie had been 19, watching her mother waste away in a hospital bed, skin turning gray, eyes going dim. The smell of antiseptic and dying flowers still made her stomach turn. She'd sworn she'd never set foot in a hospital again unless she was dragging herself in on her last breath. Yet here she was, lying awake at 3 a.m, Googling symptoms on her phone: lipoma, benign fatty tumor; sebaceous cyst, blocked oil gland, harmless; lymphoma, cancer of the lymphatic system, survival rate decreasing with delayed treatment. She slammed her phone face down on the nightstand and stared at the ceiling until dawn. When the pain became sharp enough to make her gasp while brushing her hair, Maggie finally made an appointment. The dermatology clinic in Arlington was aggressively cheerful, all pastel walls and nature photography. Dr. Robert Hayes was a soft-spoken man in his late 50s with kind eyes and permanent smile lines. He reminded Maggie of her high school biology teacher, the sort of person who made you feel safe even when delivering bad news. He examined the lump carefully, his fingers gentle but thorough. Then his expression changed. The smile lines didn't disappear, but something shifted behind his eyes. "I'd like to do an ultrasound," he said. "Right now, if that's all right." The word "now" made Maggie's throat tight. "Is it serious? I just want to get a clearer picture." He was already moving toward the ultrasound machine in the corner. The gel was cold. Dr. Hayes moved the probe slowly, methodically, his gaze fixed on the screen. Maggie watched his face instead of the monitor, searching for clues, when his jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. Her heart began to race. "That's unusual," he murmured. What is it?" He didn't answer immediately. Instead, he took several images, the machine clicking softly with each capture. Finally, he set down the probe and turned to face her. "Margaret, I need you to get a CT scan as soon as possible. Today, if we can arrange it." "CT scan. Why is it cancer?" "I don't think it's cancer." He chose his words carefully. "The ultrasound shows something with a density that's inconsistent with organic tissue. It appears to be metallic." The word hung in the air between them like a held breath. "Metallic," Maggie repeated. "I don't understand." "Neither do I. That's why we need the CT scan." He was already reaching for his phone. "Have you ever had surgery on your head? Any implants, surgical pins or plates?" "No, nothing like that, just the memory surfaced. The accident in Romania, 7 years ago. They stitched up a cut behind my ear." Dr. Hayes nodded slowly, but his expression remained troubled. "The CT will tell us more. I'm going to call over to the imaging center now. Can you go this afternoon?" Maggie's hands were shaking. "Yes." 2 days later, she sat in Dr. Hayes's office again, this time across from both him and a surgeon named Dr. Patricia Wilson, a sharp-featured woman with steady hands and an unnervingly direct gaze. The CT images were displayed on the computer screen. Even Maggie, with no medical training, could see it, a small cylindrical object nestled against the bone behind her ear, surrounded by scar tissue, like a pearl in an oyster. "It's definitely foreign material," Dr. Wilson said. "Metallic, approximately 3 by 8 millimeters. The tissue encapsulation suggests it's been there for years, 5 to 7, based on the density." "What is it?" Maggie's voice sounded distant to her own ears. "We won't know until we remove it." Dr. Wilson leaned forward. "But Margaret, I need to ask you directly. Do you have any memory of this being placed there? Any procedure, even one you thought was minor?" "No, nothing. Just the stitches after the accident." The two doctors exchanged a glance that made Maggie's skin crawl. "We need to take it out," Dr. Hayes said gently, "as soon as possible." The surgery was scheduled for the following week. Maggie spent those 7 days in a fog of anxiety, her mind spinning through increasingly dark possibilities. She researched medical implants until her eyes burned, finding nothing that matched what was lodged behind her ear. The night before the procedure, she couldn't sleep. She lay in bed scrolling through old photos on her phone, stopping at one from the Romania trip. She looked younger, happier, standing in front of some Gothic cathedral with Thomas beside her. That was before everything fell apart, before the accident that had sent her to that hospital where foreign hands had touched her unconscious body and left something behind. The operating room was smaller than she'd expected. They used local anesthetic. Dr. Wilson explained they wanted her awake in case of complications near the nerve clusters. Maggie lay face down on the table, a mirror angled so she could see if she chose to. She chose not to, staring instead at the white tiles beneath her while the surgical team moved efficiently around her. She felt pressure, tugging, the surreal sensation of her own flesh being manipulated. Dr. Wilson worked in near silence, occasionally requesting instruments from the nurse. Sarah Thompson, the surgical nurse, was young, probably not even 30, with anxious eyes that darted between the surgeon's hands and the instrument tray. "Almost there," Dr. Wilson murmured. Then everything stopped. The pressure ceased. The quiet instrumental music someone had put on seemed suddenly too loud. Maggie heard Dr. Wilson's sharp intake of breath. "What?" Maggie tried to turn her head. "What's wrong? Don't move." Dr. Wilson's voice had lost its professional calm. Sarah, hand me the specimen container." Through the mirror's reflection, Maggie saw Sarah's hand trembling as she passed over a small plastic container. The surgical forceps emerged slowly from behind Maggie's ear, gripping something that caught the overhead light with a metallic gleam. Dr. Wilson placed it carefully in the container and brought it close to her face, studying it under magnification. Her complexion went pale. Sarah made a small, choked sound. Her hand flew to her mouth and she stumbled backward, tears streaming down her face. She turned and fled the room, the door banging shut behind her. "What is it?" Maggie's heart hammered against the surgical table. "Please, somebody tell me what's happening." Dr. Wilson set down the container and moved into Maggie's line of sight. Her professional mask had cracked, revealing something underneath that looked like fear. "Margaret, I need to close the incision now. Then we need to talk. Can you stay calm for me? Just tell me what it is. It's not a medical implant." Dr. Wilson's voice was barely above a whisper. "It's a tracking device." The words didn't make sense. Maggie's brain refused to process them. A what? A microchip. Very small, very sophisticated, so there are markings on it, Cyrillic lettering, Russian, possibly. This wasn't placed there by accident. Margaret, someone did this to you deliberately. The room tilted. Maggie felt her breath coming in short, sharp gasps that didn't seem to bring any oxygen. I need to suture you," Dr. Wilson said, her professional training reasserting itself. "Then I need to report this to hospital administration. They'll need to contact the authorities." "Authorities?" Maggie's voice rose. "What authorities? The police? Given your security clearance at Blackstone Defense Solutions, probably the FBI." The next hours blurred together. Dr. Wilson closed the incision with steady hands that belied the tension in her jaw. She applied bandages, gave Maggie post-operative instructions that barely registered, and then made the phone call that would unravel everything. Within 6 hours, 2 federal agents arrived at the hospital. Agent David Mitchell was mid-40s, with a severe haircut and eyes that seemed to catalog everything they touched. His partner, Agent Jennifer Park, was younger but no less intense, her questions coming rapid fire while Mitchell observed silently. They moved Maggie to a private room. The agent sat across from her, a digital recorder on the table between them, and asked the same questions in different variations for 3 hours straight. What was your role at Blackstone Defense Solutions? Had she accessed classified information? Why had she traveled to Romania? Who had she met there? What was the name of the hospital? The doctors? Did she remember anything unusual about her treatment? I was conscious, Maggie said for the 5th time, her head throbbing. I don't remember anything except waking up with stitches. And you never thought to question it. Park's tone was sharp. A head wound severe enough to require hospitalization. But somehow you never followed up with an American doctor. I was told it was minor, but just a concussion and a small laceration. By Romanian doctors you'd never met, in a hospital you can't name, in a country where you have no contacts. Park leaned forward. Do you understand how this looks? Are you suggesting I wanted this? Maggie touched the bandage behind her ear, her voice breaking. Someone put that thing inside me while I was unconscious, and you're treating me like I'm the criminal. Mitchell finally spoke. We're not treating you like a criminal, Mrs. Sullivan, but we do need to determine if you're a security risk. A risk to whom? To national security. Mitchell's expression remained impassive. Until we complete our investigation, we're going to need you to surrender your passport. You're not to leave the state, and Blackstone Defense Solutions has been notified you're on immediate administrative leave. The words hit like physical blows. Administrative leave? I've worked there for 15 years. I've never... This isn't optional, Park interrupted. Your security clearance is suspended pending review. They left her sitting alone in that sterile room, the overhead lights humming, the world she'd built over 15 years crumbling around her like sand, her career, her reputation, her security gone in one afternoon. Her phone buzzed, a text from Emily. Dad told me what happened. What did you do? Mom? Not, are you okay? Not, I'm here for you. What did you do? Maggie stared at the message until the screen went dark, and then she sat in the gathering shadows, touching the bandage behind her ear, wondering how her life had become unrecognizable in the span of a single morning. The first 2 weeks after the surgery passed in a haze of humiliation and isolation. Maggie returned to her apartment to find everything exactly as she'd left it. Yet nothing felt familiar. The coffee mug on the counter, the unopened mail on the table, the jacket hanging by the door, all artifacts from a life that no longer existed. Blackstone Defense Solutions made their position clear within 48 hours. A terse email informed her that her employment was temporarily suspended pending the outcome of the federal investigation. They'd frozen her access to company systems, revoked her security badge, and asked her to return all company property within the week. 15 years of loyal service reduced to a cardboard box of personal items she collected from her desk while a security guard watched. Her former colleagues avoided eye contact as she walked through the office one last time. Some pretended to be deeply absorbed in their computer screens. Others suddenly remembered urgent meetings. Only one person, a junior analyst named Marcus, met her gaze and offered a sad smile. It was somehow worse than the other's cowardice. The investigation into the Romanian hospital proved frustratingly inconclusive. The FBI determined that the facility had connections to a private medical consulting group with suspected ties to intelligence operations, but the trail went cold. The hospital claimed no records of Maggie's treatment existed. A convenient fire had destroyed their archives 2 years prior. The doctors who'd treated her had either left the country or couldn't be located. Agent Mitchell called weekly with updates that revealed nothing. Yes, they were investigating. No, they hadn't determined who was responsible. No, she couldn't have her passport back yet. And no, there was no timeline for when her security clearance might be restored. These things take time, he said, as if she had an infinite supply. What Maggie did have was bills. The hospital sent the first invoice 3 weeks after the surgery, $27,500. Her insurance company sent their response a week later, claim denied. The letter cited exclusions for removal of non-medical foreign objects and elective procedures not deemed medically necessary. 27 pages of policy language basically amounting to "you're on your own." She called the insurance company 6 times. Each conversation followed the same script. A cheerful representative would review her case, put her on hold for 15 minutes, then return with practiced sympathy. Policy language was clear. Their hands were tied. She could appeal. Of course, there were forms, but the representative's tone made it clear how that would end. Maggie hired a lawyer to challenge the denial. His consultation fee was $5,000, paid up front. He was honest, at least. Insurance companies write these policies specifically to avoid paying claims like yours. You could fight it, but it'll cost more in legal fees than you'd recover. They know that. They're counting on it. Then came the FBI legal fees. Another lawyer, another retainer, $10,000 this time to ensure the investigation didn't somehow result in charges against her. The lawyer, a sharp-eyed woman named Patricia Chin, was blunt about the situation. They're treating you like a potential asset who was compromised, even if they determine you're innocent. That label sticks. Security clearance restoration could take years, if it happens at all. Maggie did the math. Medical bills, $27,000. Legal fees, $15,000. Her savings, $18,000. The deficit was $24,000. And that was before accounting for the fact that she'd lost her income. She put her apartment on the market. The realtor, a perky woman with impossibly white teeth, walked through with a critical eye and suggested a price $30,000 below what Maggie had hoped for. The market's soft right now, and you need to sell quickly, don't you? Desperation must have been written on Maggie's face. She accepted the listing price, knowing she'd likely have to go lower. Her phone rang constantly with creditors. She let them go to voicemail. The messages piled up, first reminders, then warnings, then threats. Her credit cards were maxed out. The bank sent ominous letters about her account being overdrawn. But worse than the financial collapse was Emily's silence. Maggie called every day for the first week. Each call went to voicemail. She texted constantly, checking in, apologizing, trying to explain something she didn't understand herself. The messages showed as delivered, then read. But no responses came on the 11th day. Emily finally replied, "I need space." 2 words. That was all Maggie got. She tried calling Thomas, hoping he'd help her reach their daughter. He answered on the 3rd ring, his voice distant and professionally polite. "Emily's upset," he said, as if Maggie didn't know. "She feels like her mother put the whole family in danger." "I didn't do anything," Maggie protested. "I'm a victim in this." That's not how Emily sees it. She's asking questions about your work, about what information you might have compromised. She's scared, Maggie. Then help me talk to her, please. There was a long pause. When Thomas spoke again, his tone was strange, too careful, too measured. "I think it's best if you give her time. Pushing her right now will only make things worse. She's my daughter. She's our daughter. And right now, she doesn't want to see you." The line went dead. Maggie stood in her empty apartment, phone pressed to her chest, and felt something inside her crack. Emily had moved in permanently with Thomas. All her belongings, all her clothes, the stuffed bear she'd had since childhood gone, the spare bedroom sat empty, the bed neatly made, waiting for a daughter who wasn't coming back. Friends disappeared with remarkable speed. Susan, her best friend of 10 years, sent an apologetic text. "I'm sorry, but with everything going on, I think it's better if we don't talk for a while. My husband is worried about complications. You understand." Maggie did understand. She understood perfectly. When you became toxic, people protected themselves. It was simple self-preservation. Her neighbors stopped making eye contact. She'd see them checking their mail, hear them coming up the stairs. But somehow, they always managed to disappear. before she could open her door. Once, she ran into Mrs. Patterson from across the hall at the grocery store. The older woman had actually turned her cart around and fled down a different aisle. The isolation was suffocating. Maggie found herself talking to her reflection just to hear a human voice. She slept erratically, waking at 3 in the morning to pace her apartment and Google false accusations and wrongful security clearance revocation. The internet offered no comfort, only stories of people whose lives had been destroyed by bureaucratic inertia. Agent Mitchell called in the fourth week with a new line of questioning. They discovered that Thomas worked for Sentinel Security Systems, a company that manufactured surveillance equipment. Had Maggie known about his work? Had they ever discussed her job? Had he shown unusual interest in her projects? Thomas, Maggie's exhausted brain struggled to connect the dots. What does he have to do with this? Probably nothing, Mitchell said. We're just being thorough. But the seed was planted. Maggie found herself thinking about Thomas's odd behavior before the divorce, his late nights at work, his evasiveness about projects, the way he'd sometimes ask seemingly innocent questions about her day that felt, in retrospect, a little too pointed. No, that was paranoia talking. The stress was making her see conspiracies everywhere. Still, she couldn't stop thinking about it. Thomas had sent flowers to the hospital with a card that read, "I'm sorry this happened to you." Not, "I'm sorry you're going through this," or "I'm here for you." The phrasing was odd, distant, almost like he was apologizing for something specific. She tried calling him again, but this time he didn't answer. She left a voicemail asking to talk. He texted back, "Hours later, not a good time. Let's focus on Emily right now." Maggie's apartment sold for $15,000 less than asking. The buyers, a young couple with a newborn, looked at her with a mixture of pity and suspicion when they learned she needed to close quickly. They sensed blood in the water and negotiated aggressively. Maggie signed the papers in a daze, knowing she'd barely break even after the mortgage was paid off. She packed her belongings into garbage bags and moved in with her mother. The house in Winchester was old and cold, the heating system struggling against the autumn chill. Eleanor greeted her at the door, confused about why Maggie had suitcases. "Are you visiting?" "Dear, I'm staying for a while, Mom. Remember, we talked about this yesterday." Eleanor's face went blank. "Did we?" Maggie carried her bags upstairs to her childhood bedroom. The wallpaper was the same floral pattern from 30 years ago, now yellowed and peeling at the edges. The single bed sagged in the middle. A water stain spread across the ceiling like a map of somewhere she'd never wanted to go. She lay down fully clothed and stared at that stain until darkness fell. Somewhere in the house, she could hear the television playing too loudly. Her mother watching shows she wouldn't remember in an hour. This was her life now. Broke, unemployed, living in her childhood bedroom while caring for a mother who barely remembered her name. No job, no daughter, no future she could see beyond paying off crushing debt. Her phone buzzed, a text from Emily. The first in 3 weeks. "Dad says you're living with Grandma now. Are you okay?" Maggie stared at the message, tears blurring her vision. She wanted to tell the truth that she was drowning, that she needed help, that she was terrified. But what would that accomplish except burden her daughter with guilt? She typed, "I'm fine. Just helping take care of Grandma for a while. How are you?" The response came immediately. "Busy with school. I have to go." Maggie set down her phone and listened to her mother shuffling around downstairs, already forgetting she had a daughter sleeping under her roof. 5 weeks after the surgery, Agent Mitchell called with unexpected news. The FBI's investigation had taken a turn. The microchip they'd discovered wasn't sophisticated military technology at all. It was a commercial-grade RFID medical tracking device, the kind used in some countries to monitor patients with dementia or severe cognitive impairments. "We traced the serial number," Mitchell explained, his tone almost apologetic. "It was manufactured by Sentinel MedTech, an American company, and sold as part of a shipment to Eastern European medical facilities. The technology is about 7 years old, basic location tracking within a limited range, no audio capabilities." Maggie's hand tightened on the phone. "So I wasn't being spied on by foreign intelligence? It appears you were the victim of an unauthorized medical procedure, possibly by someone at that Romanian hospital who wanted to track patients for reasons we're still investigating. But there's no evidence you were targeted because of your security clearance or your work at Blackstone." The relief was so sudden it made her dizzy. "Does that mean I'm cleared?" "The investigation into your security status is being closed. We've determined you had no knowledge of the device and posed no threat to national security. I've already contacted Blackstone Defense Solutions to inform them of our findings." After the call ended, Maggie sat on the edge of her childhood bed and allowed herself to cry. Not just tears, but great heaving sobs that came from somewhere deep and raw. She cried for the lost weeks, the destroyed reputation, the bills still crushing her. But mostly she cried from exhaustion and the faint, fragile hope that maybe, just maybe, her life could begin to resemble normal again. Blackstone called 2 days later. They offered her position back with full benefits restoration and back pay for the suspension period. The HR representative was professionally apologetic, using phrases like regrettable situation and procedural necessity. They wanted her to return the following Monday. Maggie should have felt victorious. Instead, she felt hollow. The offer came too late to save her apartment, too late to prevent the financial devastation, too late to repair the relationships that had crumbled under suspicion. She told them she'd think about it and hung up. An unexpected email appeared in her inbox that afternoon. The sender was Dr. Robert Hayes. He asked if she'd be willing to meet for coffee, not a medical appointment, just a conversation. Something about the informality of the request made her say yes. They met at a quiet cafe in downtown Winchester. Dr. Hayes arrived carrying 2 cups and a brown paper bag that turned out to contain muffins. He looked tired, Maggie thought, older than he had in his office, with deeper lines around his eyes. "Thank you for meeting me," he said, sliding one of the coffees across the table. "I wanted to check on you, not as your doctor, just as someone who's concerned." "I'm fine," Maggie lied automatically. "No, you're not, and that's okay." He broke off a piece of muffin but didn't eat it. "I've been doing this job for 30 years. I've seen a lot of people go through medical trauma. The physical part heals relatively quickly. It's the rest that takes time." And something about his gentleness cracked through Maggie's defenses. She found herself telling him everything: the bills, The destroyed career prospects, Emily's silence, living in her mother's house. He listened without interrupting, his expression thoughtful. When she finished, he reached into his jacket and pulled out an envelope. "I want you to have this." Inside was a check for $10,000. "I can't accept this," Maggie said immediately, trying to hand it back. "Yes, you can." "Oh." His tone was firm. "Consider it payment for a lesson you taught me." "What lesson?" "That I'm not as good at seeing the whole picture as I thought I was. When I saw that chip on the ultrasound, I knew immediately what it was, and I failed you by not warning you how the authorities would react, how your life would be upended. I should have prepared you better. This is my apology." Maggie's throat constricted. "You don't owe me anything. You helped me. Then let me help you more." He stood, leaving the envelope on the table. "Use it for Emily's college fund, or for taking care of your mother, or for whatever you need. You've been carrying everything alone for too long." He left before she could protest further. Maggie sat alone in the cafe, staring at the check, feeling the weight of undeserved kindness. The second surprise came the next morning, via email. The sender was Sarah Thompson, the nurse who'd fled the operating room. The message was long and rambling, full of apologies and confessions that made Maggie's blood run cold. Sarah had known Thomas more than known him. She'd dated him 3 years ago, before he married Brittany, during the period when he and Maggie were separated but not yet divorced. Thomas had reached out to Sarah 6 months ago, asking her to do him a favor. He'd learned that Maggie was scheduled for the procedure at Dr. Wilson's practice. He wanted Sarah to be present during the surgery, to make sure everything went smoothly, to keep him informed. Sarah had thought it was odd but harmless, a worried ex-husband looking out for his former wife. She'd applied for the position in Dr. Wilson's surgical unit and specifically requested to assist with Maggie's case. It wasn't until she saw the chip that she realized something was deeply wrong. The email continued. "I know I should have told the FBI all of this immediately, but I was scared of being implicated. Thomas called me after the surgery, asking what they'd found. I told him. He asked me not to mention our connection. He said it would complicate things for Emily. I was stupid enough to believe him." Attached to the email was a USB drive's worth of files, screenshots of text conversations between Sarah and Thomas going back months. Maggie downloaded them with shaking hands. The messages were damning. Thomas asking Sarah to keep an eye on Maggie's procedure. Sarah describing the chip in detail. Thomas's response, "Are you absolutely certain Russian markings?" And then, most chilling, "This is worse than I thought. I need to know exactly what the FBI finds out. Please, Sarah, for Emily's sake." The timestamps revealed something else. Thomas had contacted Sarah before Maggie even knew she needed surgery. He'd known about the lump behind her ear. He'd known she'd need it removed. He'd positioned Sarah to be there when it happened. The implications crashed over Maggie like waves. Thomas hadn't just heard about the chip after the fact. He'd known something was there. He'd been waiting for it to be discovered, which meant either he was involved in placing it or he'd known about it for years and said nothing. Maggie called Agent Mitchell. He listened to her explanation, asked her to forward the emails, and promised to follow up. Within hours, FBI agents were at Thomas's house in McLean. They confiscated his computers. his phone records, his financial statements. Sarah agreed to cooperate fully with the investigation. She met Maggie 2 days later in a park, far from prying eyes. The young woman looked exhausted, her face blotchy from crying. "I'm so sorry," Sarah said. "I thought I was helping. Thomas made it sound like he was just worried about you, like he still cared. I didn't know. I swear I didn't know what he was really doing." "What was he doing?" Maggie asked. "Do you have any idea?" Sarah pulled out her phone and opened an email chain she'd saved. "After the surgery, I started going through old messages. Thomas works for Sentinel Security Systems. They manufacture tracking devices. About 2 years ago, he asked me technical questions about medical procedures, about how someone could implant a small device without the patient knowing. I thought it was just work talk. But now—" She trailed off, unable to finish the sentence. She didn't need to. Maggie understood. The USB drive Sarah had sent contained more than just their text exchanges. It included emails between Thomas and a company called Sentinel Consulting Group, based somewhere in Eastern Europe. The emails went back 8 years, long before the divorce, spanning the time of Maggie's trip to Romania. They were coded, cautious, but the meaning was becoming clear. Thomas had arranged something. He'd paid someone. And Maggie had been carrying the evidence inside her skull for 7 years. "Why?" Maggie whispered. "Why would he do this?" Sarah shook her head. "I don't know. But there's something else." She hesitated, then continued. "In one of his messages, Thomas mentioned Emily. He said something about protecting our investment and monitoring her development. I didn't understand it at the time. But reading it now, Maggie felt ice spread through her veins. He wasn't tracking me. He was tracking Emily through me. The pieces fell into place with sickening clarity. Emily's mathematical genius, the international competitions, the scholarships and attention from prestigious universities, Thomas's obsessive interest in Emily's achievements, his detailed knowledge of her schedule, his insistence on controlling her activities. He'd been monitoring their daughter, and Maggie had been the unwitting surveillance divided to bees. Maggie drove to Thomas's house in McLean without calling first. It was late evening, nearly 9 o'clock, and Brittany's car wasn't in the driveway. Good. This conversation needed to happen without witnesses. Thomas answered the door in casual clothes, a glass of scotch in his hand. When he saw Maggie, something flickered across his face: surprise, then calculation, then a careful neutrality that made her stomach turn. "Maggie, this isn't a good time." "I don't care." She pushed past him into the foyer. The house was exactly as pretentious as she remembered: marble floors, modern art on the walls, everything expensive and cold. "We need to talk. Now." He closed the door slowly. "If this is about Emily, she's not here. She's at a study group. This isn't about Emily. It's about you." Maggie turned to face him, her heart pounding so hard she could feel it in her throat. "I know what you did." Thomas took a sip of his scotch, his expression unchanged. "I don't know what you're talking about." "The chip, Thomas. The tracking device. Sarah told me everything. The FBI has your emails." For just a moment, his mask slipped. Fear flashed in his eyes, quickly replaced by something harder. He set down his glass with deliberate care. You should sit down. I don't want to sit down. I want you to tell me the truth. Did you have that thing put inside me? The silence stretched between them like a chasm. When Thomas finally spoke, his voice was calm, almost detached. It wasn't supposed to happen like that. The doctor in Romania was supposed to place it subcutaneously during a routine procedure. The accident was unfortunate, but it provided an opportunity. Maggie felt the room tilt. Hearing him admit it, hearing him say it out loud with such casual indifference was somehow worse than any scenario she'd imagined. An opportunity. I was unconscious in a hospital bed, and you paid someone to put a tracking device inside my head. Behind your ear, he corrected, as if the distinction mattered. And it wasn't about you, Maggie. It was never about you. Then what? What could possibly justify... Emily! The word hung between them. Thomas moved to the window, looking out at his manicured lawn. Do you have any idea what our daughter is capable of? She's not just smart, Maggie. She's extraordinary. When she was 11, she solved a cryptographic problem that stumped MIT professors. Do you know what happened after that? She got scholarship offers. She got attention. Thomas's voice sharpened. From universities, from think tanks, from companies that work in national security, and from other parties, less official ones. I started getting inquiries, indirect, carefully worded. People wanted to know about Emily's capabilities, her potential, her future plans. Some offered enormous sums of money for consultation opportunities once she was older. Maggie stared at him, her mind struggling to process what she was hearing. So, you decided to track her by putting something inside me? I needed to know where she was at all times, who she was meeting with, whether anyone was approaching her. The device wasn't sophisticated, just basic location tracking, but it gave me what I needed. You spent enough time with Emily that I could monitor her movements, her patterns, her activities. You could have just asked me. You could have told me you were worried, and you would have called me paranoid. Thomas turned to face her, his expression hard. You never understood the pressure, the expectations. Emily needed protection from people who would exploit her gifts. I provided that protection. By violating me, by having strangers cut into my body while I was unconscious, I did what was necessary to keep our daughter safe. The justification in his tone, the absolute certainty that he'd done the right thing, made Maggie's hands shake with rage. How much? She asked quietly. How much did they pay you? Thomas went still. What? The emails mentioned payments, consultation fees. How much did you make selling information about your own daughter? I never sold. Don't lie to me. Maggie's voice cracked. Not now. Not after everything. The FBI has your financial records. They know about the money. Just tell me the truth. Thomas's jaw tightened. He walked to the bar cart and poured himself another drink, taking his time. When he spoke again, his voice was devoid of emotion. $2 million over 6 years from various consulting groups interested in gifted youth development programs. The number was so absurd it didn't seem real. $2 million. The divorce left me financially strained. Brittany's lifestyle is expensive. Emily's education will be expensive. I needed to secure our future. Our future. You sold access to your daughter like she was a commodity. I sold information, schedules, academic achievements, competition results, nothing that wasn't already semi-public, and I made sure no one ever got close enough to harm her. The tracking data let me identify anyone who showed unusual interest. I was protecting her. Maggie. Everything I did was to keep Emily safe. From everyone except you. Maggie's voice dropped to a whisper. Did Emily know? Does she know what you did? Thomas's silence was answer enough. She doesn't. Maggie felt sick. You've been selling information about her for 6 years, and she has no idea. What purpose would it serve to tell her she's happy, she's thriving? Why burden her with knowledge that would only cause pain? Because it's her life, her privacy, her right to know that her own father. Maggie couldn't finish the sentence. The enormity of his betrayal was suffocating. I was protecting my family, Thomas said, and the conviction in his voice was somehow the most horrifying part. He genuinely believed it. He'd violated Maggie's body, sold their daughter's information to strangers, pocketed $2 million, and he believed he was the hero of this story. The FBI is going to arrest you, Maggie said. You know that, right? This isn't just unethical. It's criminal. Assault, fraud, conspiracy. My lawyers are very good, and the evidence is circumstantial. Yes, I paid for medical consulting services in Romania. Yes, I received consultation fees for educational advisory work. Nothing directly ties me to the implantation procedure. The doctor who did it is conveniently deceased, died in a car accident 2 years ago. Sarah's testimony is helpful, but she's also admitting to her own conspiracy. She has reasons to lie, to deflect blame. The calculation in his voice made Maggie's skin crawl. He'd thought this through. He'd planned for the possibility of being caught, built-in deniability, ensured the key witness couldn't testify. Even if they can't prove it in court, Maggie said, Emily will know. When she hears what you did, she won't hear it from you. Thomas's tone turned cold, because if you tell her, you'll destroy her. She worships me, Maggie. Finding out the truth will devastate her. You'll be the one who ruins her life, not me. Are you really willing to do that to your own daughter? The manipulation was so blatant, it should have been laughable. But Maggie knew he was right about one thing: the truth would hurt Emily terribly. And Emily, who already barely spoke to her mother, might never forgive Maggie for being the messenger. You're a monster, Maggie said quietly. I'm a father who did what was necessary. History will judge which one of us was right. Maggie left without another word. She drove home in a daze, her hands gripping the steering wheel so tight her knuckles went white. When she pulled into her mother's driveway, she sat in the car for 20 minutes, staring at nothing, trying to comprehend how her life had led to this moment. The FBI investigation moved quickly once they had the full picture. Within a week, agents had traced the payment flows from multiple consulting groups back to a single organization based in Ukraine. The company's listed purpose was educational talent identification, but its actual operations were murkier, buying information about gifted children from around the world, presumably to recruit them for future employment in sensitive industries. Thomas's role had been simple: provide detailed intelligence about Emily's capabilities, schedules, and activities. In exchange, he received quarterly payments of over $80,000. He'd been Emily's pimp. selling access to their daughter's genius to the highest bidder. But Thomas had been right about one thing. His lawyers were very good. They argued that Thomas had never physically placed the tracking device himself. They claimed he'd merely hired medical consultants in Romania to monitor Maggie's health after her accident, a concerned ex-husband looking out for the mother of his child. If those consultants had done something unethical, Thomas couldn't be held responsible for their actions in a foreign country 7 years ago. The consultation fees legitimate advisory work. He'd provided academic assessments and progress reports about a gifted student. Nothing illegal about that. The fact that the student was his daughter made it ethically questionable. Perhaps, but not criminal. The FBI tried to make conspiracy charges stick. They documented the emails, the timing, the payments. But Thomas's lawyers found holes in everything. The encryption on some emails meant their content couldn't be definitively proven. The Romanian doctor's death meant no one could testify about what instructions Thomas had given. Sarah's testimony was compromised by her own involvement. 6 weeks after the investigation began, the prosecution offered a deal. Thomas would plead guilty to unauthorized access to medical records and pay a fine of $50,000. No jail time, no felony conviction, 2 years of probation. His lawyers advised him to take it. He did. The judge, an older woman with steel-gray hair and a permanently disappointed expression, seemed as frustrated as Maggie felt. She made pointed comments during sentencing about the troubling ethical implications and serious breach of trust, but her hands were tied by the plea agreement. Thomas stood in court, looking appropriately contrite, his expensive suit perfectly pressed, and accepted his punishment with a solemn nod. $50,000 less than 3% of what he'd earned from his betrayal. A rounding error. The custody arrangement didn't change. Emily was 16, old enough for her opinion to matter, and she'd chosen to live primarily with her father. The court saw no reason to alter that arrangement. Thomas's crime hadn't been against Emily, after all, just against Maggie. Maggie sat in the courtroom gallery and watched justice fail in real time. Behind her, she could hear people whispering. The case had attracted media attention. Tracking device implanted in ex-wife was too sensational to ignore. Reporters had called her dozens of times. She'd refused all interviews. Thomas walked out of court a free man. He'd face no meaningful consequences. His career was intact. Sentinel security systems had released a statement calling it a personnel matter and kept him employed. His reputation among people who mattered to him remained untarnished. He still had his house, his money, his daughter. Maggie walked out with nothing except the knowledge that the man who'd violated her body, sold their daughter's privacy, and destroyed her life would pay less in fines than she owed in medical bills. Emily was waiting outside the courthouse with her father. When Maggie emerged, Emily's eyes met hers for just a moment. There was something in that look, confusion, maybe, or the beginning of doubt. But Thomas put his hand on Emily's shoulder and guided her toward his car. Before she could speak, Maggie watched them drive away and felt the last fragile thread of hope snap inside her chest. That night, at 2 a.m, Maggie found herself in her mother's bathroom. She'd been staring at the ceiling for hours, unable to sleep, Unable to stop replaying Thomas's words, I did what was necessary. The medicine cabinet held her mother's prescriptions. Among them was a bottle of sleeping pills, 30 tablets, recently refilled. Maggie took the bottle down and held it in her shaking hands. It would be so easy. Just swallow them all, let the darkness come, stop fighting a battle she was never going to win against people who had better lawyers and fewer scruples. Her phone buzzed. A text message. From Emily. Mom. Just that, one word, no context, but Maggie stared at it like it was a lifeline thrown into dark water. Her hands were still shaking as she opened the bottle. But instead of swallowing the pills, she poured them down the toilet. She flushed twice, watching them disappear. Then she washed her face, returned to her room, and typed a response. I'm here, baby. I'm always here. 3 dots appeared, disappeared, appeared again. Finally, can we talk tomorrow? Maggie's hands were shaking again, but this time from something other than despair. Yes, any time you want. I love you. The response came immediately. I love you too. Maggie set down her phone and let herself cry. Not from pain this time, but from the overwhelming relief of still being alive to receive those words. Emily came to visit 3 days later. Maggie had cleaned the house obsessively, vacuuming floors that were already clean, arranging flowers she'd bought at the grocery store. Brewing fresh coffee she was too nervous to drink. When the doorbell rang, her hands were shaking so badly she had to wipe them on her jeans before opening the door. Her daughter stood on the porch, looking smaller than Maggie remembered. Emily had always carried herself with confidence bordering on arrogance. But now her shoulders were hunched, her eyes red-rimmed. She wore an oversized sweatshirt and had her hair pulled back in a messy ponytail. Hi, Mom. Hi, sweetie. Come in. They sat at the kitchen table with mugs of tea neither of them drank. Eleanor was napping upstairs, her television playing too loudly, even through the closed door. For a long moment, neither spoke. Finally, Emily said, I read the court documents, everything that came out in the investigation. Maggie's chest tightened. Emily, I didn't want you to have to see. Dad didn't tell me. He said it was all a misunderstanding, that you were making things up because you were angry about the divorce. But I looked up the case online. I read the actual emails they submitted as evidence. Emily's voice cracked. He was selling information about me. For years, wasn't he? There was no point in lying. Yes. And the tracking device, that was real. He really paid someone to put that inside you so he could... Emily couldn't finish the sentence. She put her face in her hands. Maggie reached across the table but stopped short of touching her daughter, afraid Emily might pull away. It wasn't your fault. None of this was your fault. I defended him. Emily's voice was muffled by her hands. When you were being investigated by the FBI, when everyone was saying terrible things about you, I believed him. He said you were careless, that you'd compromised yourself somehow, and I believed him because I wanted to believe him, because it was easier than thinking my father could do something so... She looked up, tears streaming down her face. How could he do that to you, to us? I don't know. Maggie's own eyes burned. I've asked myself that question 1,000 times. He told me he did it to protect me, that there were dangerous people interested in my math abilities, and he needed to monitor the situation. He made it sound almost reasonable when he explained it, like he was the only one who understood how serious the threat was. Emily wiped her face roughly with her sleeve. Was he lying about that, too? Was there ever any real danger? Maggie chose her words carefully. The emails suggest there were organizations interested in recruiting you. Whether they were actually dangerous or just opportunistic, I don't know. But even if the threat was real, what he did was insane, Emily finished, and selfish, and wrong. She took a shuddering breath. I moved out of his house yesterday. I'm staying with Grandma now, if that's okay. Of course it's okay. Of course. Maggie did reach out this time, taking Emily's hand. Her daughter's fingers were cold. You can stay as long as you want, forever, if you need to. They sat in silence for a while, hands clasped across the table. Eventually, Eleanor shuffled downstairs, looking confused to find a teenager in her kitchen. Emily greeted her grandmother gently, explaining who she was 3 times until Eleanor's face cleared with momentary recognition. Over the next week, Emily settled into the small guest room upstairs. She brought boxes of books, her computer, posters that she tacked to the walls. Maggie helped her organize, grateful for the simple domesticity of it, folding clothes, arranging furniture, making space for her daughter's life in this cramped old house. They were careful with each other, overly polite, like strangers learning to share space. But gradually, small routines emerged. They took turns cooking dinner. Emily helped care for Eleanor, showing remarkable patience when her grandmother forgot who she was. They watched television together in the evenings, not talking much, but present. 2 weeks after Emily moved in, Dr. Hayes called. He asked if Maggie would meet him at his office, not the clinic, his private office. The request was strange enough that Maggie agreed immediately. The office was in an old building downtown, cramped and cluttered with medical journals and framed diplomas. Dr. Hayes looked older than usual, his face drawn with exhaustion. He gestured for Maggie to sit, then locked the door behind her. "I need to tell you something," he said. "Something I should have told you months ago." Maggie's stomach dropped. "What is it?" Dr. Hayes reached into his desk drawer and pulled out a small glass vial. Inside was something that caught the light, a tiny metallic object, remarkably similar to the one that had been removed from Maggie's head. 15 years ago, I was working as a volunteer doctor in Kosovo, he began. The conflict had ended, but the region was still unstable. I was there with a medical charity, treating refugees and displaced persons. One night, I was abducted from my hotel room by men who never identified themselves. They held me for 3 days in a basement somewhere. I was drugged most of the time, in and out of consciousness. He paused, his hands trembling slightly as he held the vial. When I woke up in a hospital, I had stitches behind my left ear. The doctor said I'd been found unconscious on the side of the road, that I must have been assaulted. But something felt wrong. 2 years later, I was getting an MRI for chronic headaches, and they found it a tracking device, identical to yours. Same manufacturer, same model, just an older generation. Maggie stared at him, her mind reeling. "You knew when you saw my ultrasound. You knew exactly what it was. Yes?" Dr. Hayes set down the vial. "And I've regretted not warning you every single day since. I thought, God, this is going to sound insane, but I thought if I told you immediately, You'd feel like a victim who needed saving. I wanted you to discover your own strength, to fight your own battle. I told myself I was teaching you resilience, but the truth is, I was a coward. I was afraid that if I got involved, if I told my own story, it would complicate your case and hurt your chances. Why are you telling me now? Because I've been watching you destroy yourself, and I can't stay silent anymore. After my device was removed, I fell apart. I couldn't trust anyone. My marriage collapsed. My wife couldn't handle the paranoia, the constant security measures, my refusal to talk about what had happened. I lost custody of my son because the court decided I was psychologically unstable. I spent 5 years in that darkness, convinced I was being watched, that whoever had done it to me would come back. His voice broke slightly. Eventually, I realized the tracking had stopped mattering. The device was gone, but I was still letting it control my life. I was still giving those faceless people power over me. By the time I understood that, it was too late. My son was grown, my marriage was over, and I'd wasted years being afraid. Maggie felt something cold settle in her chest. You're telling me this because you think I'm making the same mistake. I'm telling you because you're at a crossroads. You can let what Thomas did define the rest of your life. Or you can choose something different. The device is gone, Maggie. The investigation's over. Your daughter is here with you, but you're still living like you're being tracked, like you're still a victim. I see it in your eyes every time we talk. What am I supposed to do? Maggie's voice rose. Just forgive him. Pretend it didn't happen. God, no, never forgive him if you don't want to. Rage against him if it helps. But forgive yourself for not noticing, for not protecting Emily better, for being human and fallible and doing the best you could with what you knew. Dr. Hayes leaned forward. You didn't put that device inside yourself. You didn't ask for any of this, but you survived it. And survival isn't passive. It's a choice you make every single day. Maggie's eyes burned with tears she refused to let fall. Your son, did you ever reconcile? Yes, last year. Actually, he's a doctor now, working in pediatrics. We have coffee once a month. It took 15 years and a lot of therapy, but we found our way back to each other. DeHaze smiled sadly. I tell you this not to give you false hope, but to show you that healing is possible. It's just not linear, and it's never perfect. After she left his office, Maggie sat in her car for 20 minutes, staring at the steering wheel. Dr. Hayes's story had shaken something loose inside her. She'd been so focused on what had been done to her that she'd forgotten to think about who she wanted to be now. That night, she started as a new habit. Before bed, she sent Emily a text message. Nothing profound, just small observations from her day. She didn't ask Emily to respond, didn't expect anything in return. She just wanted her daughter to know she was thinking of her. Day 1, I saw a cardinal in the backyard. Grandma says they're good luck. The next night, Day 2, made your favorite soup. Saved you some. And the next, Day 3, found your old math trophy in a box. Remember when you won that in 5th grade? For 2 weeks, Emily didn't respond. The messages showed, as delivered, then read, but nothing came back. Maggie kept sending them anyway, one small act of faith that eventually her daughter might be ready to answer. On the 45th day, Emily's response finally came. "I'm not ready to talk about everything yet, but thank you for not giving up on me." Maggie read the message 3 times, then pressed the phone against her chest and let herself cry, not from pain this time, but from the overwhelming relief of connection, however fragile. The next evening, Emily appeared in the kitchen doorway while Maggie was making dinner. "Can I help?" "Of course." They worked side by side in comfortable silence, chopping vegetables and stirring pots. Eleanor wandered through, confused about why there were 2 women in her kitchen, and Emily patiently explained again that she was the granddaughter. When dinner was ready, the 3 of them sat at the small table and ate together. And for the first time in months, Maggie felt something that resembled peace. After they'd cleaned up and Eleanor had gone to bed, Emily lingered in the kitchen. "Mom, can I ask you something? Anything?" "The device. When you found out what it was, when you realized Dad had—" Emily paused, struggling with the words. "Were you scared of me? Did you blame me for what happened?" Maggie set down the dish towel and turned to face her daughter fully. "Never. Not for 1 second. You were the reason I kept going, knowing you were out there, even when you weren't speaking to me. Gave me something to hold on to. I should have believed you," Emily whispered. "When the FBI was investigating, when everyone was saying terrible things, I should have known you wouldn't do anything wrong. I'm sorry, Mom." "You have nothing to apologize for. You were protecting yourself the only way you knew how." Maggie reached out and tucked a strand of hair behind Emily's ear, the same gesture she'd made 1,000 times when Emily was small. "We're both here now. That's what matters." Emily leaned into her mother's touch, and for the first time since the surgery, since the revelation, since the entire nightmare began, Maggie felt the beginning of something she'd thought was lost forever hope. 3 months after Emily moved in, Maggie received a job offer from a small data analytics firm in Maryland. The position paid significantly less than Blackstone, $55,000 instead of $95,000. But the company specialized in healthcare research rather than defense contracting. No security clearances required, no questions about her past. She accepted immediately. The commute was manageable, just under an hour each way. The office was cramped and cluttered, nothing like the sleek corporate environment she'd left behind. But her new colleagues were kind. They knew about her situation. The story had been public enough, but they'd treated her normally, without the whispered speculation or careful distance she'd experienced before. Her manager, a woman named Patricia Chen, who'd survived her own corporate scandal years ago, took Maggie aside on her first day. "What happened to you was terrible," she said bluntly. "But it doesn't define your capabilities. I hired you because you're good at what you do. Don't forget that." The validation, simple as it was, nearly made Maggie cry. She threw herself into the work, grateful for problems that had clear solutions. Data patterns didn't betray you. Statistical models didn't lie. There was comfort in numbers, in the clean predictability of analysis. She stayed late most nights, building back the professional competence that had been stripped away. Money remained impossibly tight. Even with the new job, Maggie was drowning in debt. The medical bills totaled $87,000 after various negotiations and payment plans. Legal fees had consumed another $23,000. She'd managed to pay off $30,000 using the money from selling her apartment and Terhase's gift, but that left $80,000 still outstanding. She worked out a payment plan $800 a month for 10 years. It was crushing but manageable, just barely. In late September, Emily received acceptance letters from 3 prestigious universities, including MIT. She'd applied early, her mathematical abilities making her a sought-after candidate despite the chaos of her family situation. The financial aid package from MIT was generous, but not quite enough. There would still be a gap of approximately $15,000 per year. Maggie looked at the numbers and felt her chest tighten. She'd need to take out loans, work overtime, somehow find money that didn't exist. But watching Emily's face light up as she read the acceptance letter made every impossible calculation worth it. "I can defer a year," Emily offered. "Save up money, work, help you." "Absolutely not. You're going—" Maggie's voice was firm. "We'll figure it out." They did figure it out, through a combination of student loans, work-study programs, and Maggie quietly taking on freelance data analysis projects at night. She slept 4 hours on average, survived on coffee and stubborn determination. But Emily would have her education. That was non-negotiable. In October, Eleanor's condition worsened dramatically. The Alzheimer's had progressed to the point where she no longer recognized Maggie most days. She wandered the house at night, confused and frightened, calling out for her long-dead husband. Maggie installed locks on the exterior doors to keep her mother from wandering outside. But the constant vigilance was exhausting. One evening, Maggie came home from work to find Eleanor standing in the kitchen, staring at a pot of water that had boiled dry on the stove. The smoke detector was shrieking. Emily had gotten home just in time to turn off the burner. "I don't think it's safe for her to be alone anymore," Emily said quietly. Maggie knew she was right. They hired a home health aide to stay with Eleanor during the day, another expense they couldn't afford but couldn't avoid. The aide, a patient Jamaican woman named Grace, became part of their strange household. On a cold morning in late October, Maggie woke to find Eleanor standing beside her bed. It was 3 in the morning, and her mother was wearing a nightgown, her white hair loose around her shoulders. "Maggie?" Her voice was clear, lucid in a way it hadn't been for weeks. "Is that you, baby?" "Yes." "Mom, I'm here." Eleanor sat on the edge of the bed, and in the dim light from the hallway, Maggie could see tears on her mother's face. "I'm scared. I don't know where I am most of the time. I don't know who I am." Maggie took her mother's hand. "You're Eleanor Hayes? You're my mother. Oh, and you're safe. I'm dying. Aren't I?" The bluntness of the question stole Maggie's breath. "Mom, it's all right. I'm not afraid of dying. I'm afraid of forgetting you before I go, of leaving without saying—" Eleanor's voice broke. "I'm so proud of you, Maggie. I know things have been hard. I know I haven't always understood what you were going through, but I see how strong you are, how you keep going even when everything falls apart. You're so much stronger than I ever was." "That's not true. You were always strong." "I was afraid of being alone after your father died, afraid of getting old." of losing my mind, and look, all my fears came true anyway. But you face your fears head on. You don't hide from the hard things. Eleanor squeezed Maggie's hand. Promise me you'll keep doing that. Promise me you won't let fear win. I promise, Eleanor smiled, and for just a moment she looked like herself again, the mother who'd raised Maggie alone, who'd worked 2 jobs to keep them housed and fed, who'd been fierce and stubborn and unbreakable. Then the moment passed, and confusion clouded her eyes again. Where's your father? He should be home by now. He'll be here soon. Mom, let's get you back to bed. 3 weeks later, Eleanor died peacefully in her sleep. The hospice nurse said it was common for Alzheimer's patients to have moments of clarity near the end, as if the disease released its grip just long enough for final goodbyes. The funeral was small, just Maggie, Emily, Hayes, Sarah Thompson, and a few of Eleanor's old neighbors. Thomas didn't attend, which was probably for the best. They buried Eleanor beside Maggie's father in the cemetery outside town, under a maple tree that had gone brilliant red with autumn. After the service, Dr. Hayes approached Maggie. Your mother was remarkable. The few times I met her, she had such clarity about what mattered. She was scared at the end, but she didn't let it stop her from living. Like mother, like daughter. Dr. Hayes squeezed her shoulder gently and left her alone with Emily at the graveside. I'm going to miss her, Emily said softly. Me too. They stood in silence, watching leaves fall around them. Finally, Emily said, Mom, can I tell you something? Always. I've been seeing a therapist about Dad, about everything that happened. She asked me what I was most angry about, and I realized I'm not angry at you. I never really was. I was angry at him. But it was easier to be mad at you because you were safe. You wouldn't abandon me. No matter what I said, Dad would. Maggie turned to look at her daughter. You don't have to apologize. I'm not apologizing. I'm explaining. Emily met her mother's eyes. I understand now why you kept sending those texts. Why you didn't give up even when I was awful to you. You were showing me what real love looks like, the kind that doesn't quit, even when it's hard. Emily, let me finish. I need to say this. Emily took a shaky breath. For my college essay, I wrote about you, about how you survived something that should have broken you. And instead of becoming bitter, you just kept showing up. For me, for Grandma, for yourself. The essay got me into MIT. Mom, they said it was one of the most powerful pieces they'd read this year. Maggie's vision blurred with tears. Can I read it? Eventually, when I'm ready. Emily smiled. But I wanted you to know you saved yourself. And in doing that, you showed me how to save myself, too. They held each other there among the falling leaves, and Maggie felt something shift inside her chest. Not healing exactly, the wounds were still too raw for that, but the beginning of acceptance. She'd lost so much, but she still had this, her daughter, choosing to stay. In November, Maggie received an unexpected check in the mail. It was from Sarah Thompson, along with a letter explaining that she'd organized a fundraiser online, a crowdfunding campaign to help with Maggie's medical bills. Sarah had shared Maggie's story carefully and respectfully, and the response had been overwhelming. Strangers had donated, but to us, friends Maggie thought had abandoned her contributed. Even some former colleagues from Blackstone had sent money. The total was $43,000. Maggie called Sarah immediately, overwhelmed. "I can't accept this. It's too much." "It's already done," Sarah said firmly. "People wanted to help. Let them. You've been carrying everything alone for too long." With the fundraiser money, Maggie was able to pay off the remaining medical debt. For the first time in months, she opened her banking app without feeling sick. The accounts weren't healthy. She'd still be rebuilding for years, but they were no longer catastrophic. By Thanksgiving, Maggie and Emily had settled into a rhythm. They'd moved from Eleanor's house into a small two-bedroom apartment in Frederick, splitting the rent. It was cramped and the heating was unreliable, but it was theirs. Emily decorated her room with physics posters and string lights. Maggie bought second-hand furniture and curtains that didn't quite match. On Thanksgiving morning, Maggie woke early to start cooking. She'd invited Dr. Hayes, Sarah, and Agent Mitchell, who had become, surprisingly, a friend. He'd called regularly during the investigation to check on her, and those calls had continued after the case closed. They'd gotten coffee a few times. Nothing romantic. Just two people who'd gone through something difficult and found unexpected common ground. The apartment filled with the smell of roasting turkey, even though it was a small bird from the discount grocery store. Maggie made stuffing from a box, mashed potatoes from a bag, green bean casserole with canned soup. Nothing fancy. But it was food, and it was warm, and it was enough. The guests arrived together, having carpooled from different parts of town. Dr. Hayes brought wine, decent wine, which felt extravagant. Sarah brought flowers and a homemade pie. Agent Mitchell brought sparkling cider and an awkward confession that he didn't really know what to bring to Thanksgiving dinner. "Your presence is enough," Maggie told him, and meant it. They squeezed around the small table, chairs mismatched and elbows bumping. Emily lit candles in the center, cheap votives from the dollar store that flickered cheerfully. Before they ate, Dr. Hayes suggested they share what they were grateful for. "I'll start," he said. "I'm grateful for second chances and for patients who teach me more than I teach them." Sarah went in next, her voice quiet. "I'm grateful I chose the right side, even though it was hard, and I'm grateful for forgiveness I didn't deserve." Agent Mitchell cleared his throat. "I'm grateful for people like Maggie who remind me why I do this job, and for being invited to dinner, which honestly I wasn't expecting." Emily looked at her mother. "I'm grateful Mom didn't give up on herself or on me, even when I gave her every reason to." Finally, Maggie spoke. "I'm grateful for this moment, for this table, for these people who became family when my old family fell apart. I'm grateful for being alive and for having a daughter who's braver than I ever was. And I'm grateful that even after everything, I can still feel grateful. That seemed impossible 6 months ago." They ate slowly, savoring both the food and the companionship. The turkey was a little dry and the stuffing was too salty, but no one complained. They told stories and laughed and carefully avoided mentioning Thomas or tracking devices or FBI investigations. For a few hours, they were just people sharing a meal. After dinner, Emily and Maggie stood at the small kitchen sink washing dishes. Through the window, they could see the first snowflakes of the season beginning to fall. "Mom, can I ask you something?" Emily dried a plate carefully. "Does it still hurt, the scar?" Maggie touched the spot behind her ear reflexively. The incision had healed months ago, leaving only a small, slightly raised line hidden by her hair. Not physically, no, but emotionally, Maggie considered the question. Sometimes, when I think about what Thomas did, about the years I spent being tracked without knowing, but mostly, she paused, searching for the right words. Mostly it reminds me that I survived. The device is gone, but I'm still here. That scar is proof that I healed. Emily set down the dish towel and turned to face her mother. I have something to tell you, something I've been scared to say. Maggie's heart clenched. What is it? A few weeks ago, I found a small bump behind my left ear. I thought I was terrified it was another device, that Dad had done the same thing to me. Emily's voice shook. I got an X-ray. It was just a scar from when I fell off my bike when I was 10. But for those few days before I knew, I understood. I understood what it felt like to think your own body had been violated, that you couldn't trust your own skin. Oh, honey. That's why I couldn't talk to you or Dad. I was so scared, and I didn't know who to trust. Emily's eyes filled with tears, but then the X-ray came back clear, and the first person I wanted to tell was you, because I knew you'd understand. You wouldn't minimize it or tell me I was overreacting. You'd just be there. Maggie pulled her daughter into a tight embrace. They stood there in the kitchen, holding each other while snow fell outside, and their guests laughed in the next room. And Maggie thought about scars, how they marked you but didn't define you, how they were proof not of damage, but of healing. We're going to be okay, Maggie whispered into Emily's hair. I know, Emily whispered back, because we have each other. And later that night, after the guests had left and Emily had gone to bed, Maggie stood by the window watching snow accumulate on the street below. Her reflection stared back at her, tired, older than she'd been a year ago, but still standing. She touched the scar behind her ear one last time, and for the first time, it didn't fill her with rage or violation or grief. It was just a part of her now, a mark that told a story of survival. They say time heals all wounds, but I learned something different. Time doesn't heal, it just teaches you to carry the weight differently. That scar behind my ear will never disappear. And maybe that's okay. It reminds me that I survived 7 years of violation, months of financial ruin, and the devastating betrayal of someone I once trusted with my life. But more importantly, it reminds me that healing isn't about erasing the past. It's about choosing who you become afterward. I could have let Thomas's actions define me forever. I could have stayed bitter, isolated, convinced that trust was impossible. Instead, I chose something harder. I chose to keep showing up for Emily, for myself, for the messy, imperfect life that was still worth living. DeHaze told me once that we're not defined by what's done to us, but by what we do next. He was right. The tracking device is gone. The investigation is over. But the most important choice remains mine to make every single day. Will I live as a victim or as someone who refused to be destroyed? I choose the latter. What about you? When life knocked you down, what helped you stand back up? Have you ever had to choose between bitterness and healing? Share your story in the comments below. Your words might be exactly what someone else needs to hear today.